Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. I recently started getting into designing synth presets and released my first pack for Serum. After completing that one, I wanted to make another for a different synth. I went through my library, none of them were really clicking with me until I got to Arturia's Pigments. I picked up Pigments a few years ago on sale, and to be completely honest, never really used it. It wasn't until I started doing my own sound design that I realized how powerful it is. There are a bunch of videos on YouTube if you're looking for a beginner's guide. The point of this video is to show a specific use case I stumbled upon. The technique I'm going to talk about today is something I've been referring to as soundscapes. These are patches that can really act as the foundation of a track and are highly performable. I'm going to start with a blank patch and build from there. By default, only engine 1 is enabled and it's set to wavetable. The shape will be a basic sine. The first thing I'm going to do is change the engine to sample and then select a loop from my library. For this example, I'll be using a loop I wrote called Glacier. Once I have that loaded in, I'm going to go to the Edit tab and set the sample boundary. Looping is currently off, so I'll enable that and set a fade so the loop is smoother. The loop is in the key of G flat minor, so I'm going to set the root note to G flat. Now the pitch will reflect the key I'm pressing. Now that all of that is set up, we can get into the fun stuff. First, there's a little box in the bottom left-hand corner which features the sample effects. By default, this is set to Bit Crusher, which is great, but there are some other things here that are worth checking out. The first one is unison. This allows you to add voices and detune them. Adding voices beefs the sample up and adds some more width. The second one that I'm a huge fan of is chord. Like unison, this allows you to add voices, but instead of the voices being copies of the initial voice, these will be pitch shifted. The chord knob lets you choose which chord the voices will follow. Your options include octaves, perfect fifths, as well as major and minor chords with extensions. I find that octave and perfect fifth are the ones I most commonly use. For this example, I'm going to be setting the chord to octave. Now, as I increase the number of voices, you'll hear the additional pitch layers be introduced. Before I move on to the second sample, I'm going to mess with the filters a little bit. By default, the filters are in series, which means that the signal goes into the first one and then into the second one. These filters are summed and then sent to both effects sections A and B. What I like to do is change the filter mode to split, which means that filter 1 goes to FX section A and filter 2 goes to FX section B. This allows me to independently filter and add effects to the two engines. For filter 1, I'm going to keep it as low pass, adjust the cutoff and resonance a bit, and then enable key tracking so the cutoff frequency will respond to the key being pressed. Now we can move on to engine 2. The way I like to think about this is that sample 2 will essentially be my lead. When selecting a sample, I want something that can be looped. I'm going to be using digital deer horn sample for my preset sample pack. For now, I'm going to turn off engine 1 so I can clearly hear what I'm doing with engine 2. First, I'm going to change the output to filter 2. Once again, I'll set this to loop. Now I can talk about what I think is quite possibly the coolest feature of Pigments. In the tune section, there's a button labeled Q and a pencil. Enabling Q allows me to quantize coarse pitch changes to specific notes. Clicking on the pencil brings up a 1-octave keyboard, and from there you can manually deselect notes that you don't want as options. For this example, I'm going to lock the pitch changes to the pentatonic minor scale. One thing to note is that when Mod Quantize is active, this will only work for modulation sources. Manually changing the coarse pitch will still be unquantized. Now that this is set, you can take any mod source and apply it to the tune, and it will always stay in key. My favorite way to use this is by assigning a macro knob. The macro knobs are unipolar, meaning that they only move in one direction, so you want to change the coarse pitch to -24 semitones or even -36 if you want a full 6-octave spread. Now I can noodle through the scale with macro knob 1. Another thing I like to do is use a high pass filter to inversely filter the sample to keep any weird low end stuff out. I'll be using a 36 dB per octave slope with the resonance adjusted to make it as flat as possible. Turn the macro knob all the way down so the sample is playing back at the lowest pitch possible. Now adjust the cutoff to your liking and grab macro 1 and drop it on the cutoff. Set the range all the way to the left, and now as the pitch decreases, the cutoff will increase. Now that we're all done with Engine 2, we can re-enable Engine 1 to hear how this sounds in context. This is pretty cool, but there's still more we can do. Because I set the scale of the lead to pentatonic minor, each note will still be in key a perfect fifth up, so we can enable the chord effect, set the chord to perfect fifth, and use a macro knob to control how many additional voices we'll be hearing. When I make these soundscapes, I like to cover the audio spectrum as much as possible. As of right now, we have a good mid-range and upper mid-range, but we're lacking bass and highs. This is where the utility engine comes in. In here, we have 2 noise generators and an oscillator. I'm going to enable the oscillator and keep it on sine. I'm going to do the same pitch quantization I did on the lead and quickly set the output to direct out so that the bass will be unaffected by any effects we add later on down the line. Now we can play with the amp envelope. To do that, I'll be using a function generator. These mod sources are very flexible and can be used to dial in specific step sequence changes or be used as an envelope or LFO. I'm going to drag and drop function 1 onto the output. I kind of like the default shape. It creates a kick drum-like effect. That's cool, but it's a bit repetitive. I'm going to add an LFO into the mix. I'm going to set LFO 1 shape to random and then the rate to synced half notes. Since the default pitch is so low, I'm going to set the LFO to unipolar so the random changes will only be increases in pitch. Now we can drag and drop onto the pitch. Another cool trick here is if you want to add some slew time to the pitch changes, you can increase the smooth amount. If you want to attenuate the range of the bass pitch changes or completely turn them off, you can use a macro control to sidechain the LFO. On LFO 1, if you hover over the name, you'll see that it changes to a sine. From here, select sidechain, set the source as macro 3, and then increase the amount to 1. Now, when the macro knob is fully counterclockwise, the bass will be unaffected by the LFO, and when it's fully clockwise, the LFO will be able to pull from the full range of values. The last step here before moving on to the effects is adding a noise source. There are a ton of options here ranging from classic white noise to natural field recordings. I'm partial to the field recordings. I'm going to use the rain sample. Once you've selected your source, you can play with the tune, filter the sample, and set the volume and which filter the noise goes into. I also like to turn keyboard tracking on so the tune will change relative to the key I'm pressing. Final step is to add effects. Pigments has 2 insert effects sections and an aux section. We set this up in a way where engine 1 is going to section A and engine 2 is going to section B, and then everything minus the bass is being sent to the aux section. For the aux, I'm going to keep this as just a reverb. I think the cathedral preset sounds nice. I'm going to increase the dry wet and turn up the send level. For engine 1, I don't want to do a ton since there's already a lot going on. I'm just going to add a bit crusher, set it to smooth, and then increase the bit depth control a little. Now I can bring the dry wet up and the effect will be a little white noise on the sample. For engine 2, I want to add a delay and chorus. I'm going to add the chorus first. I personally prefer the Juno 6 chorus over the other chorus. For delay, I like the tape echo. I'm just going to mess around with the parameters until I'm happy with them. I think we're done here. I'm going to head over to the play page where we have the hold option. This means that whatever note I press will be held until I toggle hold off. If you're going to be moving between keys, I suggest setting the play mode to legato so you won't have any overlap. Let's check this out. This only scratches the surface of what you can do with pigments. There are a lot of other modulation sources at your disposal, and you can really go nuts with randomizing parameters. I hope this was interesting. Like I said in the intro, this isn't meant to be a traditional tutorial for using pigments, more of just an interesting use case. If you like what you heard, I'll be releasing an original preset pack next week that features 50 presets ranging from basses to leads to pads to soundscapes, just like the one I showed today. If you haven't checked out my Patreon, definitely give that a look. All of the Tier 2 and above members get access to all my sample packs as part of the subscription fee. As of right now, that means my presets pack, my serum pack, my autumn sample pack, as well as early access to the pigments pack. That's going to do it for today. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.